Bruce, I'm sure you saw the comments there from Joey McGuire in Texas Tech. Do we imagine we'd see more people starting to take the shots at Notre Dame, considering their place inside the playoff bracket right now?
Yeah, I probably would think so because this is the time of year where it gets really catty in the coaching world as everybody's trying to prop themselves up and take shots at somebody else.
Unfortunately, like Mike said, when the facts are laid out, Notre Dame's schedule is harder than Texas Tech. Those words start to ring a little hollow, don't they?
The first two games of the year, you have a trip to Miami, and when your non-conference is your conference schedule. I think that's part of it. And I think what hurts Texas Tech's argument a little bit in this regard is just, they're the best team in the Big 12, and the rest of the conference, BYU was undefeated. They beat them handily. I think the best argument Texas Tech has is they beat up on the two teams that were the best team in their conference so far. And they're going to probably have to play one of them again. So that's not going to help their argument, because then if they do end up getting through. But I think if you're Texas Tech, you just got to handle your business. If they come out and go 12-1, they're going to probably be a top 4 seed, but they're definitely going to be in the top 6, I would think, by the end of all this.
No, I couldn't agree more on that. They finish up the season with UCF and West Virginia. They'll have the Big 12 championship. They got a Heisman candidate in their linebacker room. Everything is coming up Texas Tech right now, especially on that defense here. We know, Bruce, that a lot of this season has been defined by some of the coaching tenures, and it's starting to get a little catty between Brian Kelly and LSU. LSU put some proposed buyouts in front of Brian Kelly. He has made it clear and rejected those, looking for that full $54 million in the buyout. How do you see this finishing up as his tenure for LSU ends?
It could get messy. It could end up, are they going to push back on some kind of morals clause to try to take it to court? I don't think anybody wants that. Those things never seem to, need to come out great. But it's been such a chaotic time for LSU. When you have the governor coming out the way he did, then you have the AD losing his job. I mean, we did a big story on The Athletic last week, or about 10 days ago, about just what a mess the Brian Kelly tenure was and how bad of a fit he was in there. And in the end, I think, you look at it, it's a good job, but I'm sure, and I, haven't asked you this, but I'm sure there's a lot of Notre Dame fans going, oh yeah, see how that worked out. You didn't think you could compete for a national title here, and then the guy who replaced you played in the national title game, and you didn't even finish in the top 10 in 4 years in Baton Rouge. So, maybe that's a bit of karma on Brian Kelly.
Yeah, it certainly did blow up in Brian Kelly's face a little bit. A lot of blue blood jobs that are open. Do you think we're going to get a lot of first-time, highly placed coordinators getting some of these jobs?
I don't think not those jobs. I think right now, because of the success of, let's say, a Curt Cignetti, you may get more of the guy who's really seasoned and experienced to get one of those jobs. But I don't think there's enough highly successful coaches to fill some of these jobs. You have LSU and Florida open. Those are places that have incredibly high bar. They're going to look at fit because of what just happened in Baton Rouge with Brian Kelly. You have Penn State, where they fired the guy who was basically a play away from playing for the national title last year, who had a lot of double-digit win seasons. And the guys we thought would have been in play for Penn State, Curt Cignetti, a Pennsylvania guy, has done an amazing job at Indiana. Matt Rule, who's really close to the Penn State AD. Those guys aren't in consideration because they're off the table and they're staying at their old places. So I think there's going to be a little bit of reaching going, maybe. And then the other factor of this that makes it a little interesting is you have guys like a Clark Lee, who has done an amazing job at Vanderbilt, but it's his alma mater. You have a guy like Jeff Brom, terrific coach. He's at his alma mater in Louisville. There's just a bunch of guys who you could see being, attractive to some of these schools, but they may not be as movable as you think. Even Kenny Dillingham, who's done a really, really good job and almost beat Texas in the playoff last year at Arizona State, that's also his alma mater. And he's a guy who'd coached at Auburn, which is a big job. And the last time Auburn was decent, he was the offensive coordinator. I don't know if he's willing to make that move, because I think people have seen that. And also because of the way the Brian Kelly firing happened and some of these others, James Franklin, I think some of the contracts that schools are probably wanting to give out and maybe a little less of these balloon payments at the end of them. I think that make it a little harder to find candidates to take the jobs.
Yeah, throw Brent Key in that too, who I think's response to some of this chatter was "cut me open and see what colors I bleed," in reference to his Georgia Tech lineage. So that one seems pretty safe and secure there. You mentioned the number of coaches that have received extensions in the wake of all these moves. Every week that Lane Kiffin's extension with Ole Miss isn't announced, does it become clearer and clearer that he is destined for one of these high-profile jobs?
I would think that, but the part that gives me pause is, Auburn at the time, like 3 years ago, was a bigger job historically than Ole Miss. He decided to stay. Ole Miss has some really good factors going to it to keep Lane Kiffin. One, they have a really good setup with their collective, and it's basically their portal situation is run by a guy named Walker Jones, who's a former Ole Miss player who was a CA agent and then an executive at Under Armour. And that is about as smooth an operation as there is when it comes to the money side, when it comes to the portal and NIL and how that's all kind of, working in Oxford. The other piece of it is Lane Kiffin's entire extended family is now really settled in Oxford. And I don't know if he sits there and goes, you know what, I'm gonna make the playoff this year, because if you look at the rest of their schedule, it's cupcakes, and they're probably going to be a one-loss team going in the playoff. So that puts it further down the road, because then it messes up the timing a little bit, or a lot, if you're Florida or LSU. And so do you sit there and go, okay, there's got to be some good faith if we're one of those schools, and go, hey, we'll do some kind of agreement with Jimmy Sexton where he coaches out the playoff, and then whatever happens, then he comes back to us, because you're basically punting on this year's recruiting class, and there's only one portal window. Now I have no idea if some of these NFL jobs, because now the Giants job is open, and that's a very attractive job, I think, for a lot of people. And by the way, I think his old quarterback is with the Giants. So I don't know if that becomes a thing. It's going to be interesting to see how all these dominoes fit. But when it comes to the coaching carousel in college, right now, Lane Kiffin is the belle of the ball.
So I have one on the field question. There's 3 undefeated teams: Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M. Let's say one of those makes the national championship game. What 1 or 2 loss team do you think is the best out of the rest that could meet them in a championship game?
I've been really impressed by A&M, but to me, it's Ohio State is the team I would trust the most. After that, Georgia's come on. They beat a pretty mediocre Mississippi State team. It's really the first game where I felt like they just blew somebody out as opposed to having to come back. It's still Georgia, but I feel like it's not quite the same level on defense. Texas has gotten better on offense, but I'm not, believing that much. I liked how Oregon found a way to win, and they were really depleted. I mean, Kenyon Sadiq is an elite tight end, and they didn't have him. They didn't have DeCorian Moore. The part that gives me hesitation on saying all this is just like, oh, now all of a sudden I'm basically picking an all Big Ten, final if it's Ohio State, Oregon. But, at this point, that would be the way I would go, but not to, in the back of my head, I'm also thinking about, like, look, CJ Carr's looked really good, and they have the best backfield, and the defense has gotten better. So I don't know. At this point, to answer your question, I'd probably go with Oregon in there, just because they found a way to win, and they were really depleted last week. And I do think they're a physical team.
You took me right to where I wanted to go with the Big Ten conversation, because on the field, they've got that to look forward to. Off the field, a lot of discussion about the potential 20-year, $2.4 billion private capital deal for the Big Ten. Michigan and USC have raised their hand to protest this. How do you see this playing out for the first conference to really seriously get close to walking down this road?
It's a great question. I don't, because of what you said. I mean, Michigan's the bluest of blue bloods when it comes to this. I don't know how they go forward. USC is obviously the outsider who's now part of the conference, but I just think if if they're not on the same page on this, though, I don't know how they kind of make that work. Because I think this is something that, for me, felt like something it would be like very much like the Big 12 might do. Because Brett Yormark came as an outsider, and they've been open to some dramatic changes in there and some of the things. Whereas I feel like if you're the Big 10, do you really do this kind of thing? That's why I was like a little surprised that it's gotten to this point. But we've seen so much change in college athletics just in like the last 5 years. We probably saw more in the last 5 years than we did in the previous like 50 years. So maybe it's not a stretch, but I just think Michigan pushing back. I wonder if now it becomes a political thing inside where they're trying to get other people on their side to not go in that direction.
And if you get a few of the big brands, who knows what can happen as that conversation is ongoing.